The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Rosewood Bistro, casting warm golden light across the polished wooden tables. It was one of those perfect spring days when everything seemed to sparkle with promise. Keisha pulled into the parking lot, her heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time since baby Zoe was born 3 months ago, she was going out to eat at a real restaurant. She sat in her car for a moment, looking at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles still shadowed her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, but she had managed to put on mascara today. That felt like a victory. The past few months had been a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the constant worry that came with being a new mother. "Okay, little one," she whispered to Zoe, who was sleeping peacefully in her car seat. "Mommy really needs this." Her best friend Carmen had insisted on treating her to lunch. "You've been cooped up in that house for way too long," Carmen had said over the phone. "You need to remember what the outside world looks like. Besides, Zoe needs to get used to being around people." Keisha had hesitated at first. What if Zoe cried the whole time? What if she needed to nurse in public? The thought made her nervous, even though she knew she had every right to feed her baby whenever and wherever needed. But Carmen wouldn't take no for an answer, and deep down, Keisha knew she was right. She missed feeling like herself, missed conversations about things other than feeding schedules and sleep patterns. The restaurant was busier than she expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Families occupied several tables, and the gentle hum of conversation mixed with the soft jazz playing in the background. A young hostess with a bright smile greeted them at the door. "Table for 2, plus 1 little angel," the hostess said, grinning at Zoe. "Follow me. I have the perfect spot for you." They were seated at a corner table near the window, away from the main flow of traffic but still part of the warm atmosphere. Keisha appreciated the thoughtfulness. The table was spacious enough for the diaper bag and car seat, and the booth seating looked comfortable. "This is perfect," Carmen said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Look at this place. I can't believe I've never been here before." Keisha looked around, taking in the warm wood paneling, the fresh flowers on each table, and the photographs of local landmarks lining the walls. It felt welcoming and family-friendly. Several other tables had children, and the staff seemed genuinely happy to accommodate families. "The reviews online were amazing," Keisha said, settling Zoe's car seat beside her. "They said it's one of the most family-friendly places in town." Their server, a middle-aged woman named Joyce, approached with menus and a warm smile. "Welcome to Rosewood Bistro. I see you have a beautiful little one with you today. We have high chairs available if you need one later." "Thank you," Keisha said. "She's still tiny, so the car seat works perfectly for now." Joyce nodded knowingly. "I have 3 grandchildren. Trust me, I understand. Take your time looking at the menu, and let me know if you need anything at all." As Joyce walked away, Carmen leaned forward excitedly. "See, I told you this would be good for you. When's the last time someone offered to help you with something baby-related instead of just giving you unsolicited advice?" Keisha laughed for the first time in days. "You're right. My mother-in-law means well, but yesterday she told me I was holding Zoe too much, and that's why she won't sleep through the night." "Please." Carmen rolled her eyes. "What does she know? You're doing an amazing job." They spent the next 20 minutes catching up, their conversation flowing easily between updates about work, mutual friends, and Keisha's adjustment to motherhood. Zoe slept peacefully through most of it, occasionally stirring but settling back down quickly. The food arrived just as Zoe began to wake up. Keisha had ordered the grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, something she hadn't eaten in months. The smell made her realize how hungry she was. She'd been so focused on making sure Zoe was fed that she often forgot about her own meals. "This looks incredible," she said, picking up her fork. But Zoe had other plans. The baby's soft whimpers quickly escalated to full crying, the kind that every parent recognizes as the hunger cry. Keisha's heart sank. She had hoped to at least start eating before this happened. "Hey, it's okay," Carmen said gently. "Do what you need to do. I'm not going anywhere." Keisha had prepared for this possibility. She had practiced at home, had watched YouTube videos, and had read every article about discreet public nursing. She pulled the lightweight nursing cover from her diaper bag, a gift from her sister that she had been too nervous to use until now. "I'm going to try nursing her," she said quietly to Carmen. "I brought everything I need." "Good for you," Carmen encouraged. "You've got this." Keisha lifted Zoe from the car seat and settled her in her arms. The baby's cries softened immediately at her mother's touch. With practiced movements, Keisha arranged the nursing cover and positioned Zoe. Within moments, the restaurant returned to its peaceful atmosphere. "You make that look so easy," Carmen said admiringly. "Trust me, it's not always this smooth," Keisha replied with a soft laugh. "Last week I tried to nurse her in the car and somehow got tangled up in the seatbelt." As she nursed Zoe, Keisha felt a sense of pride she hadn't expected. This was natural. This was what mothers had been doing for thousands of years. She was providing for her child in the most fundamental way possible, and she was doing it with grace and dignity. The other diners seemed completely unbothered. An elderly couple at a nearby table smiled warmly when they caught her eye. A mother with 2 school-age children gave her an encouraging nod, clearly remembering her own early days of motherhood. For the first time since Zoe was born, Keisha felt like she belonged in the world again. She wasn't just a sleep-deprived woman hiding in her house. She was a mother, confidently caring for her child while still maintaining her own identity and relationships. "You know what?" she said to Carmen, taking a sip of her iced tea with her free hand. "I think I'm finally starting to figure this whole mom thing out." Carmen smiled. "I never doubted it for a second." The sun continued to stream through the windows, and the gentle sounds of the restaurant created a cocoon of normalcy around them. Keisha couldn't have known that in just a few minutes. This peaceful moment would be shattered by someone who saw her simple act of nurturing as something shameful. From across the restaurant, Beverly had been watching the young woman with growing irritation. She prided herself on being observant, on noticing things that others might miss. And what she was witnessing at that corner table was, in her opinion, completely inappropriate. Beverly had come to Rosewood Bistro for her usual Tuesday lunch. At 62, she was a woman of strict routines and firm opinions. She always requested the same table, ordered the same meal, and expected the same level of service. Today, however, her peaceful lunch was being disrupted by what she considered a flagrant display of poor judgment. She dabbed her lips with her napkin and set it down firmly on the table. This had gone on long enough. Someone needed to say something, and clearly nobody else had the courage to do it. Beverly had never been one to shy away from speaking her mind, especially when it came to matters of public decency. Standing up from her table, she smoothed down her perfectly pressed blouse and checked her watch. She had been coming to this restaurant for over 3 years, and she had never seen anything like this. The management needed to know that their reputation was at stake. As she approached the corner table, Beverly could hear the young women laughing about something. The casual attitude made her even more frustrated. Didn't they understand the inappropriateness of the situation? Didn't they care about the other diners who were trying to enjoy their meals? "Excuse me," Beverly said, her voice sharp enough to cut through their conversation. Both women looked up, surprised by the interruption. The one holding the baby had kind eyes and a gentle face, but Beverly wasn't swayed by appearances. She had a job to do. "I'm sorry to interrupt your meal," Beverly continued, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "But I think you need to understand that what you're doing is not appropriate for a public establishment like this." Keisha felt her stomach drop. She had been dreading this moment, hoping it would never come, but knowing it was always a possibility. "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean," she said carefully, keeping her voice calm. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean," Beverly replied, her voice rising slightly. "This is a family restaurant. There are children present. What you're doing should be done in private." Carmen leaned forward, her protective instincts kicking in. "She's feeding her baby." "There's nothing inappropriate about that." Beverly's face flushed with indignation. "There are proper places for that kind of activity. This is not one of them. I've been coming here for years and I've never seen such a display." "I'm being completely discreet," Keisha said, gesturing to the nursing cover that completely concealed what she was doing. "I have every legal right to nurse my daughter wherever she needs to be fed." "Legal right?" Beverly scoffed. "Just because something is legal doesn't make it right. What about common courtesy? What about respect for other people who are trying to eat?" The conversation was starting to attract attention from nearby tables. Keisha noticed an elderly man turning in his chair to see what was happening, and a family with teenagers had stopped talking to listen. Her face burned with embarrassment, but she held her ground. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said firmly. My baby was hungry and I'm feeding her. That's what mothers do. Not decent mothers, Beverly snapped, and immediately the entire atmosphere changed. The words hung in the air like a slap. Carmen's eyes widened in shock, and Keisha felt tears prick at her eyes. Around them, the other diners had gone completely silent. "Excuse me?" Carmen said, her voice dangerously quiet. Beverly realized she had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I'm just saying that considerate people think about others. They don't subject innocent diners to their personal business." "My personal business?" Keisha repeated, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm feeding my 3-month-old daughter. This isn't personal business, this is basic human necessity." "Then take it to the bathroom," Beverly said dismissively. "Or better yet, do it at home where it belongs." "Would you eat your lunch in a bathroom?" Carmen shot back. "Because that's essentially what you're asking her to do." Beverly's face grew redder. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by women she considered to be beneath her social standing. "I'm asking her to show some decency and consideration for others. The only person being indecent and inconsiderate here is you," Carmen said, standing up from her seat. At this point, the confrontation had drawn the attention of the entire restaurant. Joyce, their server, appeared at the edge of the group, looking unsure of how to handle the situation. 2 other servers had gathered near the kitchen, whispering among themselves. "Ma'am," Joyce said carefully, addressing Beverly. "Perhaps we could discuss this more privately?" "No," Beverly said firmly. "This needs to be addressed right here, right now. I'm a paying customer and I deserve to eat my meal without being subjected to this." "This spectacle," Keisha repeated, her voice breaking. "I'm feeding my baby. How is that a spectacle?" Beverly looked around the restaurant, expecting to see supportive faces, expecting others to back up her position. Instead, she saw a room full of people staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. But she had come too far to back down now. "Look," she said, her voice getting louder. "I don't care what the law says. This is about common sense and basic manners. There are children here who shouldn't have to see this, and see what?" demanded a voice from across the room. It was the mother with 2 school-aged children. "See a baby being fed? My kids understand that babies need to eat. Maybe you should too." Beverly whirled around, furious at being challenged by multiple people. "This is ridiculous. When I was raising my children, we knew how to be discreet." "She is being discreet," said the elderly man who had been watching. "More discreet than you're being right now, that's for sure." The support from strangers should have warned Beverly that she was on the wrong side of this argument, but her pride had taken over. She had invested too much in this confrontation to admit she was wrong. "Fine," she said, turning back to Keisha with determination in her eyes. "If you won't listen to reason, then maybe this will help you understand." Before anyone could react, Beverly reached out and grabbed the back of Keisha's chair, giving it a sharp jerk backward. The sudden movement caught Keisha completely off guard. The chair tilted, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she was going to fall while holding Zoe. She managed to catch herself, clutching her baby protectively to her chest, but the nursing cover fell away and she had to quickly adjust her clothing. The restaurant erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Someone screamed. Carmen jumped up so fast she knocked over her water glass. Joyce dropped the menu she was holding. "Oh my God," Carmen shouted. "Did you just assault a woman holding a baby?" Beverly stepped back, suddenly realizing what she had done. The room was spinning with voices, all of them angry, all of them directed at her. She had meant to make a point, to get the woman's attention, but she hadn't meant for it to be so violent. I was just," she stammered, but no one was listening to her explanations. Keisha was shaking, tears streaming down her face as she held Zoe close. The baby, startled by the sudden movement and the loud voices, had begun crying. The sound seemed to amplify the chaos in the room. "Someone call the police," called out the elderly man. "That woman just attacked a mother and baby." "I'm recording this," announced a teenager, holding up his phone. "This is insane." Beverly looked around the room at the faces surrounding her. Every single person was staring at her with disgust and anger. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the voice of reason, the defender of public decency. Instead, she had become the villain in her own story. "I want to speak to the manager," she said desperately, as if authority could somehow rescue her from the hole she had dug. "I want to speak to whoever is in charge here immediately." The restaurant had transformed from a peaceful dining space into something that felt more like a courtroom. Every conversation had stopped. Forks were suspended halfway to mouths. Even the soft jazz playing in the background seemed inadequate against the tension that had settled over Rosewood Bistro. Keisha sat frozen in her chair, still clutching Zoe protectively against her chest. Her hands were trembling and she could feel her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The baby's cries had subsided to worried whimpers as if she could sense her mother's distress. "Are you okay?" Carmen asked urgently, kneeling beside Keisha's chair. "Did she hurt you?" "Did she hurt the baby?" Keisha managed to shake her head. "We're okay," she whispered, though she didn't feel okay at all. The sudden jerk of the chair had scared her more than she wanted to admit. For a split second, she had imagined falling backward with Zoe in her arms, and the thought made her feel sick. Beverly stood a few feet away, her face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light. Anger, confusion, indignation, and something that might have been the first hint of regret. But she wasn't backing down. If anything, the attention seemed to be fueling her determination to prove she was right. "I demand to speak to the manager," Beverly repeated, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "This establishment needs to know what kind of behavior they're allowing in their dining room." Joyce, the server, looked completely overwhelmed. In her 15 years of working in restaurants, she had never encountered anything like this. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen, clearly hoping someone with more authority would appear and take control of the situation. "Ma'am," Joyce said carefully, "I can get the manager, but perhaps we could all just take a step back and—" "No," Beverly interrupted firmly. "I've been a loyal customer here for years. I spend good money in this establishment, and I expect a certain standard of conduct. What this woman is doing is inappropriate. And now she's trying to make me look like the bad person for speaking up about it." The elderly man who had been sitting nearby stood up slowly, his weathered hands gripping the edge of his table. "Lady, the only person who looks bad here is you. That young mother was minding her own business, feeding her baby quietly in the corner. You're the one who made a scene." "Exactly," agreed the mother with the 2 school-age children. She had moved her family closer to Keisha's table, as if forming a protective barrier. "My daughter is 10 years old, and even she knows that babies need to eat. What you did was completely out of line." Beverly turned to face these new challengers, her back straightening with indignation. "Oh, so now everyone's an expert on proper behavior? When I was your age, we understood the concept of modesty. We didn't just do whatever we pleased in public." "Modesty?" Carmen stood up, her voice rising. She was completely covered. The only thing you could see was a baby's head. "How is that immodest?" "It's the principle of the matter," Beverly insisted. "There are appropriate places for certain activities, and a public restaurant is not one of them." More people began to speak up. A young couple at a table near the window expressed their support for Keisha. A businessman eating alone shook his head in disgust at Beverly's behavior. Even some of the restaurant staff who had gathered near the kitchen were whispering among themselves, and their expressions made it clear whose side they were on. But the vocal support from strangers seemed to make Beverly even more defensive. She had committed to her position, and admitting she was wrong would mean acknowledging that she had just assaulted a woman and baby over something that wasn't actually a problem. "I don't care what any of you think," Beverly declared, her voice getting louder and more shrill. "I know what I saw, and I know what's appropriate. This woman was making a spectacle of herself, and someone needed to say something. The only spectacle here is you," said the teenager who had been recording. "This is going to be all over social media in about 5 minutes. I hope you're proud of yourself." Beverly's face went pale at the mention of social media. She hadn't considered that her actions might be recorded and shared. The modern world of instant documentation and viral videos was something she often complained about but rarely thought would affect her directly. "You can't record me without my permission," she said weakly. "Actually, I can," the teenager replied. "This is a public place and you just assaulted someone. This is evidence." The word assault seemed to hit Beverly like a physical blow. She looked around the restaurant with growing panic, finally beginning to understand the gravity of what she had done. But instead of apologizing or backing down, her pride pushed her to double down even harder. "Assault?" She laughed bitterly. "I barely touched her chair. If she's so fragile that she can't handle someone getting her attention, maybe she shouldn't be out in public with a baby." The collective gasp from the room was audible. Even people who had been trying to stay out of the confrontation looked shocked by the callousness of the comment. Keisha finally found her voice. It was quiet, but in the tense silence of the restaurant, everyone could hear her clearly. I just wanted to have lunch with my friend. I just wanted to feed my baby when she was hungry. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and several people in the restaurant visibly winced with sympathy. The contrast between her quiet dignity and Beverly's escalating aggression was stark. "You were bothering me," Beverly shot back. "You were bothering other customers. Just because you have a baby doesn't mean the whole world has to accommodate your choices." "What choices?" Carmen demanded. "The choice to feed her child? The choice to leave her house? What exactly do you think she should have done differently?" Beverly gestured wildly around the restaurant. "She could have planned better. She could have fed the baby before coming here. She could have brought a bottle. She could have done any number of things to make you more comfortable," interrupted the elderly man. "But she didn't have to. She has every right to be here, feeding her baby however she chooses. You're the one who's out of line." Joyce finally spotted her manager emerging from the office near the back of the restaurant. She practically ran to meet him, speaking in urgent whispers and gesturing toward the confrontation. The manager, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, listened intently before making his way through the restaurant toward the disturbance. Beverly saw him approaching and immediately straightened up, smoothing down her blouse and arranging her face into what she probably thought was a reasonable expression. "Finally," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Someone in authority who can handle this situation properly." The manager surveyed the scene, Keisha still holding her baby protectively, surrounded by supportive strangers. Carmen standing guard like a fierce protector. Beverly isolated but defiant. And an entire restaurant full of people watching the drama unfold. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "I'm Diego, the owner of Rosewood Bistro. I understand there's been some kind of disagreement." Beverly stepped forward immediately, assuming he would naturally side with her. "Yes, thank you for coming. I'm Mrs. Beverly Hamilton, and I've been a customer here for over 3 years. I need to report a serious problem with the conduct being allowed in your establishment." Diego nodded politely. "I see. And what seems to be the problem?" "This woman," Beverly pointed dramatically at Keisha, "was engaging in inappropriate behavior during lunch service. When I politely asked her to be more considerate of other diners, she became hostile and defensive. Several people in the restaurant started to speak up, wanting to correct Beverly's version of events. But Diego held up a gentle hand to indicate he wanted to hear the full story. "And then what happened?" he asked Beverly calmly. Beverly hesitated for a moment, perhaps beginning to realize that her actions might not sound as reasonable when described to the restaurant owner. "Well, she continued to be disruptive, so I tried to get her attention more directly. By jerking her chair while she was holding a baby," Carmen added sharply. Diego's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He turned to look at Keisha, taking in her shaken appearance and the protective way she was holding her daughter. "Ma'am," he said gently to Keisha, "are you and your baby all right? Do you need any assistance?" It was a simple question, but the kindness in his voice broke down the last of Keisha's composure. Tears started flowing again as she realized that someone in authority was actually concerned about her well-being, rather than trying to remove her from the premises. Beverly watched this interaction with growing alarm. This wasn't going the way she had expected at all. Diego's presence seemed to shift the entire energy of the restaurant. His calm demeanor and genuine concern for Keisha's well-being stood in sharp contrast to the chaos that had been building around Beverly's outburst. He moved with the confidence of someone who was completely comfortable in this space, and it was clear that both his staff and regular customers respected him. "Please," he said gently to Keisha, "take all the time you need. You're not going anywhere until you feel ready." Beverly watched this exchange with growing frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The manager was supposed to understand her position as a long-term customer. He was supposed to recognize that she was trying to maintain standards in his establishment. "Excuse me," Beverly said, stepping closer to Diego. "I don't think you understand the situation here. I've been trying to explain that this woman was engaging in inappropriate public behavior, and instead of addressing the real problem, everyone seems to be attacking me." Diego turned to face Beverly, and she took this as encouragement to continue. She had dealt with restaurant managers before, and she knew how to present herself as the reasonable customer who deserved support. "I spend a considerable amount of money in this restaurant," Beverly continued, her voice taking on the tone she usually reserved for speaking to service workers. "I've been coming here for 3 years, every Tuesday, same table, same order. I've brought friends here, I've recommended this place to others. I think that gives me some standing to point out when something is disrupting the dining experience." Diego nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right that loyal customers deserve respect and consideration. Can you help me understand exactly what was disrupting your dining experience?" Beverly felt a surge of vindication. Finally, someone who understood customer service. That woman was breastfeeding at her table, out in the open, where children and families were trying to eat. When I politely asked her to be more discreet, she became argumentative and hostile. "I see," Diego said calmly. "And when you say she was doing this out in the open, what exactly did you observe?" Beverly gestured toward Keisha. She was feeding the baby right there at the table. It was obvious what she was doing. Was she using any kind of cover or trying to be discreet in any way? Beverly hesitated. She had noticed the nursing cover, but admitting that would undermine her argument about the behavior being blatant and inappropriate. She had some kind of blanket, but that's not the point. The point is that there are appropriate places for that kind of activity, such as a restroom or her car, or better yet, she could have stayed home until the baby was older. Diego's expression remained neutral, but several people in the restaurant made sounds of disgust at Beverly's suggestions. The mother with 2 children shook her head in disbelief. And when she didn't agree to relocate, Diego continued. What happened next? This was where Beverly's story became more difficult to tell. She looked around the restaurant, suddenly very aware that everyone was listening to every word she said. "Well, she was being unreasonable," Beverly said defensively. "I was trying to help her understand that her behavior was affecting other customers, and she just wouldn't listen. She kept arguing with me, making a scene." "Mrs. Hamilton," Diego said, and Beverly was pleased that he had remembered her name. "I want to make sure I understand exactly what happened. Did you at any point make physical contact with this customer or her property?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Beverly looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching her, and she realized that lying wasn't really an option. Too many people had witnessed what happened. "I may have touched her chair," Beverly said carefully. "I was trying to get her attention because she wasn't listening to reason." "You jerked her chair backward while she was holding a 3-month-old baby," Carmen interjected angrily. It wasn't." Beverly stumbled over her words. "I was just trying to make a point." Diego's calm expression never changed, but there was something in his eyes that made Beverly suddenly feel very uncomfortable. She had expected support or at least understanding, but instead she felt like she was being evaluated and found wanting. "Mrs. Hamilton," Diego said quietly, "I want to make sure I understand your position. You believe that a mother feeding her baby, while using a cover to maintain privacy in a family restaurant, is inappropriate behavior that warranted physical intervention?" When he put it that way, Beverly's argument sounded much less reasonable than it had in her head. But she had committed to this position, and backing down now would mean admitting that she had been completely wrong. "I believe in maintaining certain standards," Beverly said stiffly. "I believe that paying customers shouldn't have to deal with situations that make them uncomfortable." "I absolutely agree," Diego said, and Beverly felt a moment of relief. Paying customers should definitely be protected from situations that make them uncomfortable. Beverly nodded vigorously. "Exactly. Thank you for understanding." "Which is why," Diego continued, his voice all calm but somehow more serious, "I need to address the fact that you just physically intimidated a nursing mother in my restaurant." The words hit Beverly like a slap. "What? No, that's not—" "I was trying to help maintain standards. Mrs. Hamilton, in my restaurant, the standards include treating all customers with respect and dignity. They include understanding that families with babies are welcome here, and that mothers have every right to feed their children whenever and however they need to." Beverly's face was cycling through emotions again, but now confusion and panic were winning out over indignation. "But I'm a loyal customer. I've been coming here for years, and I appreciate that loyalty," Diego said. "But loyalty doesn't give anyone the right to harass other customers, and it certainly doesn't justify putting a mother and baby at risk of physical harm." "Physical harm?" Beverly repeated. I barely touched her chair. You jerked the chair of a woman holding an infant, Diego said, his voice becoming firmer. In what world is that acceptable behavior? The teenager with the phone spoke up. I got it all on video. She grabbed the chair and yanked it backward. The lady almost fell. Beverly whirled around to face the teenager. Delete that video right now. You don't have permission to record me. Actually, Diego said, this is my restaurant, and I absolutely want to see that video. We take the safety of our customers very seriously. Beverly felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was all going wrong. The manager was supposed to be on her side. She was the longtime customer. She was the one who spent money here regularly. She was the one trying to maintain decent standards. I don't understand, she said weakly. I was trying to help. I was trying to make sure your restaurant maintained its reputation. Mrs. Hamilton, Diego said, and his voice was gentle but absolutely firm. Let me be very clear about something. This restaurant's reputation is built on being welcoming to families. We pride ourselves on being a place where parents can bring their children, where mothers can feed their babies without fear of harassment, where everyone can enjoy a meal in comfort and safety. Beverly stared at him, finally beginning to understand that she had fundamentally misread the situation. But proper behavior, Diego said, is exactly what that young mother was demonstrating. She was discreetly caring for her child's needs while trying to enjoy a meal with her friend. You are the only person in this restaurant who behaved improperly. The silence that followed was deafening. Beverly looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching her, and for the first time, she seemed to really see the expressions of disgust, anger, and disappointment directed at her. I think, Diego continued, we need to discuss what happens next. Beverly's stomach dropped. She had expected vindication, support, maybe even an apology from the other woman. Instead, she found herself facing consequences she had never imagined. What do you mean? She asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Diego looked around his restaurant, taking in the faces of his customers, his staff, and the two women at the center of this confrontation. His decision was already made, but he wanted to handle this situation with the same care and thoughtfulness that had made Rosewood Bistro a beloved community gathering place. Mrs. Hamilton, he said, turning back to Beverly, I need you to understand something very important. What happened here today was assault. You physically grabbed the chair of a customer who was holding an infant, putting both mother and baby at risk of serious injury. Beverly's face went white. Assault? That's ridiculous. I was just trying to get her attention. The legal definition of assault doesn't depend on your intentions, Diego replied calmly. It depends on your actions and their impact on the victim. He turned to Keisha, who was still holding Zoe protectively, though the baby had finally settled down and was sleeping peacefully again. Ma'am, I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for what happened in my restaurant today. This is not who we are, and it's not what we stand for. Keisha looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. I just wanted to feed my baby, she said quietly. And you have every right to do that anywhere in this restaurant anytime you need to, Diego said firmly. Breastfeeding mothers are always welcome here. What happened to you today was completely unacceptable, and I want to make sure it never happens again. Beverly watched this exchange with growing panic. She was beginning to realize that she had made a terrible mistake, but her pride was still preventing her from fully acknowledging it. Look, she said desperately, maybe we all got a little carried away. Maybe we can just chalk this up to a misunderstanding and move on. Mrs. Hamilton, Diego said, his voice still calm but absolutely resolute. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was harassment followed by assault, and I cannot allow someone who would attack a customer to remain in my restaurant. Attack? Beverly's voice was getting shrill again. I didn't attack anyone. I'm a 62-year-old woman. What kind of attack could I possibly? You physically grabbed the chair of a woman holding a baby, Diego interrupted. You put a mother and infant at risk of serious injury because you disagreed with her perfectly legal and appropriate behavior. That's not acceptable under any circumstances. The teenager who had been recording held up his phone. I've got the whole thing on video. You want to see it? Diego nodded. Yes, I do. As the teenager began to play back the video, Beverly felt her last hope slipping away. Watching herself yank Keisha's chair backward, Seeing the terror on the young mother's face as she struggled not to fall while protecting her baby, Beverly finally began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. "Oh God," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. The video continued, showing her continued aggression even after the physical assault, her refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, her insistence that she was the victim in the situation. "I think I've seen enough," Diego said, handing the phone back to the teenager. "Mrs. Hamilton, I'm going to need you to leave my restaurant immediately." "But I haven't even finished my lunch," Beverly protested weakly. "Your meal will be comped," Diego said. "But you are no longer welcome here, ever." The words hit Beverly like a physical blow. "You're banning me? I'm a loyal customer. I've been coming here for 3 years. And in 3 years you've never done anything like this," Diego replied. "Which makes me wonder if this is really who you are, or if you're having some kind of crisis that's affecting your judgment. Either way, I cannot allow someone who would physically threaten a customer to remain in my establishment." Beverly looked around the restaurant one more time, perhaps hoping to find a single supportive face, someone who would speak up for her position. Instead, she saw a room full of people who were watching her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "What's ridiculous," said the elderly man who had supported Keisha throughout the confrontation, "is that it took this long for someone to ask you to leave." Diego walked over to where Keisha was sitting and crouched down beside her chair. "I want you to know that we're going to take care of your meal today, and I hope you'll give us another chance to show you the kind of experience we normally provide." Keisha nodded, still too shaken to say much. "I also want you to know," Diego continued, "that if you want to file a police report about what happened, I will provide the video evidence and my full support." "Police report?" Beverly interjected frantically. "That's completely unnecessary. It was just a misunderstanding." "Ma'am," Diego said, standing up and facing Beverly, "assault is not a misunderstanding, and it's not my decision whether or not to involve law enforcement. That's entirely up to the victim." Carmen, who had been quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up. "Keisha, whatever you want to do, I'm behind you 100%. Keisha looked down at her sleeping daughter, then around at all the strangers who had spoken up in her defense. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else," she said quietly. Diego nodded. "I understand. And I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about pressing charges, Mrs. Hamilton is permanently banned from this restaurant." Beverly made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Please, let's all just calm down and think about this rationally. I made a mistake. I admit that. But ruining my reputation over one moment of poor judgment seems excessive." "Mrs. Hamilton," Diego said, his patience finally showing signs of wear, "you didn't just make a mistake. You harassed a customer, assaulted her while she was holding an infant, and then spent the next 20 minutes trying to justify your behavior instead of apologizing." He gestured toward the door. "I need you to leave now. If you refuse, I'll call the police myself." Beverly looked around the restaurant one more time, perhaps hoping for a miraculous change in public opinion. But the faces looking back at her were tired, disgusted, and ready for this drama to end. Slowly, she gathered her purse and stood up from her table. Her movements were stiff and robotic, as if she was finally understanding that she had lost this battle completely. "This isn't over," she said weakly, but the threat carried no weight. "Yes, it is," Diego replied firmly. "Joyce will escort you to the door." As Beverly walked through the restaurant toward the exit, guided by the server, the other diners began to applaud. It started with the elderly man, then spread to the family with teenagers, then to other tables throughout the room. By the time Beverly reached the door, the entire restaurant was clapping. The sound followed her out into the parking lot, where she stood for a moment beside her car, finally alone with the magnitude of what had just happened. Back inside the restaurant, Diego returned to Keisha's table. "I want to personally apologize again for what happened here today. This is not the kind of environment we work to create." "Thank you," Keisha said, finally finding her voice again. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for handling an impossible situation with such grace and dignity," Diego replied. "You and your daughter will always be welcome here." As the restaurant slowly returned to normal, with conversations resuming and meals being finished, Keisha felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of empowerment. She had stood up for herself and her right to feed her child. She had been supported by strangers who recognized injustice when they saw it. And she had learned that there were people in the world who would protect mothers and babies rather than shame them. The teenager who had recorded the confrontation approached her table before leaving. "I hope it's okay that I got that on video. I wanted to make sure there was evidence in case you needed it." "Thank you," Keisha said. "That was really thoughtful. My mom breastfed my little sister everywhere," he said with a shrug. "What that lady did was completely insane." As he walked away, Carmen reached across the table and squeezed Keisha's hand. "You know what? I think this turned out to be a pretty good day after all." Keisha looked down at Zoe, who was sleeping peacefully despite all the drama that had swirled around her. "Yeah," she said with a small smile. "I think you might be right." The afternoon sun was still streaming through the windows of Rosewood Bistro, and for the first time since becoming a mother, Keisha felt like she truly belonged in the world. Not as someone who had to hide or apologize for her needs, but as someone who deserved respect, support, and kindness. And in a restaurant full of people who had stood up for that principle, she finally understood that she was not alone.